Hey guys, today I'm going to build a kayak launch and put it right here on the dock. It's going to look like this. And this video is brought to you by Advil. Actually, it should be, because my back is going to be killing me. This is a lot of lumber. All of the lumber that I used for this project was infused with chromium, copper, and arsenic, or whatever deadly chemicals they're using nowadays to preserve wood. It is necessary if you're going to do projects that are going to be in the water. So I guess the extra weight was worth it. The 4-inch PVC pipe was heavy too, but it was an optional thing for some extra flotation, and you might not need one if you were going to build this. Alright, well, I've already thought this through and made some plans. Highly technical blueprints, obviously. So this should go together without a hitch, I would think. Actually, the closest thing I had to a plan was a photograph that I had found online. It was made out of metal. I was going to make mine out of wood, so I needed a place to do some cutting. That should do it. The kayak launch that I was going to build was going to be about 8 feet long and was going to have a rib every 16 inches or so. I was going to make it 42 inches across, and the uprights were 2 foot each. So I would get 1 rib out of 1 2x4. At least part of it. Well, that looks plenty wide for a kayak to get inside of. But to stiffen this up, I'm going to put some braces across like this and make a little curved cradle. The braces were going to be about 2 foot each, which meant I would get enough braces for 2 ribs out of 1 2x4x8. It required some steep cuts. I might have been better off doing it with the circle saw. But I tend to be a little bit stubborn. And, of course, as always with power tools, you got to be careful. Don't force it like I did. Then it was time to drill it together, Batman. I'm using deck screws here because they were a lot cheaper than stainless steel. My total cost was going to be about $350 for this project, which is a lot better than the $3,500 that some other companies wanted for kayak launches. Building these parts, I think, are pretty easy. You can see here I'm trying to get the height figured out, but the real difficult part is going to be trying to figure out how to work around this stuff here. I'm probably going to have to roll this carpet back, move this cleat and the ladder, and this giant thing has got to go too. So let's do it. This little pry bar here made pulling up the galvanized nails out of the carpet kind of easy. I resorted to using a hammer instead of hitting it with my hand. Sometimes I use my head. The ladder came out really easy because that was just held in with screws. But this big metal brace here, which I tied off in case it fell in the water, that was going to be different. I had to remove this old rotten plank that was on the end so that I could see the bolts that were lying underneath, holding it in place. The board was nasty and was going to have to be replaced. And it had hornet's nests on it. When I looked down below, I could see that the hardware was all rusted. This was going to require some sort of cutting tool to remove. I had just the tool, but it's on the water. Extra care always should be taken when you're using electrical tools within inches of salt water. It did work like a charm though. And this thing that I thought was going to be a big problem turned out to be a success. Huzzah! Next was to attach a 2x6 to the existing dock, upon which everything else would rest. After that boat passed, I just held it in place with my leg and tried to screw it down with a couple deck screws temporarily. Then I added a big bolt to be sure it wasn't going to go anywhere. Later on, I would add a lot more of these big bolts. Meantime, my confidence was growing that this project was going to be a success, so I went inside and I cut up the rest of the lumber for the other 6 ribs. Again, if you build one of these, your kayak launch can be longer than 8 feet, in which case you would probably use more ribs, or spread them out further. Here I'm adding a little extra lumber down in the corners to give it a little more support. Rather than use the chop saw this time, I just marked it with the straight edge, that being the level, and then I cut it off with the circular saw, and I must say that worked out a lot better. It felt safer. And I didn't cut my toes off. One by one, I got all the ribs assembled as the rain continued to fall outside. And soon, I would get to see for the first time what they look like with a kayak sitting on top of them. It did weeble wobble a little bit, but I was pleased to see that I could still sit in it and the thing didn't fall like a bunch of dominoes. It was good, but needed improvement. You can see I added some runners here, which I think I'm going to replace with 1x instead of these 2x. That'll reduce the weight, and it will allow me to curve these a little bit. I'll get to that in a minute. First I wanted to take all the lumber off and then change their heights so that the kayak wouldn't rock so much. Like there's some 1x material there, which is actually 3/4. There's a 5/4 deck board, and then I've got 3 2x pieces of stock under those. Now, when I install it, I can make the front one even lower, and then the 1x runners will make a nice gradual slope. But first I want to see if the kayak will sit on there without teeter-tottering too much. I was sad to see that raising up the back did not help that at all. I was starting to think that I was going to have to raise up the front too. Well, that's why we test it before we nail everything together. Moving a couple of the spacers under the ribs, I reconfigured everything and tried it again. I took a look underneath. Everything seemed to be pretty good. But this is a 12-foot sit on top. I wanted to see if it would also accept a 10-foot sit inside. From what I could tell, this seemed pretty good. Even when I sat in it, it didn't rock and roll too much. My final design has a little bit of a shallow to it in the center. This way it cradles the boat really nicely, and it won't rock too much when you're getting in and out of it. The issue I'm having with that, though, is that I wanted the front to be lower so that you could kind of ride up on it from the water. So the solution, I think, will be to keep the shallow but have the whole thing slightly tilted. So let's see if we can mark everything so that when we install it, it'll be at the proper level. First thing I did is took a blue marker. I'd use the red marker later. And I marked all of the ribs where they would be with the spacers underneath them. And I also numbered them so I wouldn't forget which one's which. Then I could lift them up, take them off of the spacers that I had underneath, and mark where the 2-bys were going to be to give me that slope I talked about. All I did was mark progressively a ½ inch higher each time. So the first one was at the blue line, the second was a ½ inch above, then an inch above, then an inch and a half, and 2 inches, etc. Hopefully this all makes sense to you. It barely made sense to me when I was doing it, but I assure you it worked out. The next step was going to be to tie them all together, but they were going to be really heavy, so I decided it should be as close to the water as possible while I did that. And here you can see a surrogate rib, which I'm holding in my left hand. That represents where the ribs will be, and in my right hand I'm holding a piece of wood that I'm going to add. And you can see that's going to sit up against the floats and prevent the rib from rocking at all when you step on it. Alright, the plan now is to take a 2x4 and attach it to the bottom on either side and bring it up level with that red line that I made to allow for some pitch so that the part that you come to first is lowest. And soon it'll be time to put her in the water. Doing all this work on a floating dock was kind of interesting with boats coming by and everything bouncing around. But all in all, it wasn't so bad. I got to work with no shoes, and the view, I must say, was pretty incredible. I've done a lot of woodwork, but not in places as nice as this. Every rib got about 4 screws on each side, so this thing was starting to feel really rigid, which is a good thing. If people are going to stand on it, I want it to be very sturdy. There was only one thing left to do to make it as strong as I could possibly make it. You can see the center part there is going to be the thinnest, and although I've got these gussets here to try to keep it from racking too much, it could very well bend right here because that 2x4 is on edge, and you put a lot of weight on that side, cantilevering it off of the dock quite a bit. This whole thing could bend right in the center. So that's what I'm going to use the 4x4s for. I'm just going to screw them from the top down through these pieces here to rigid that up, and that should keep it from bending in the middle. All of the 4x4s I scavenged off of old pallets. I had 5 of them laying around that I could use for free. That should be plenty to stiffen up the base of this thing. I'm going to screw this one on and it'll be ready to launch. Except I don't know if I'll be able to, what with this weather moving in. We'll see. One of the last things I had to do was add these eyes in 3 spots. They were going to be temporary. Through them I was going to attach some long lines so that 3 people could handle this thing once it slipped into the water. I was really hoping that it was going to float and wouldn't just sink to the bottom. I was also hoping that we wouldn't get rained on. It was going to be close. Okay, it's launch time. Hi! I got Brad and Todd are going to help me launch this thing, so she's heavy, but hopefully when it's in the water it's somewhat buoyant. And we've got these ropes now to, I don't know, are they considered lines? I know they are on a boat, but
sure. Just before it rains.
It ain't gonna rain, come on now. We got this. I figure we just slide it in the water. We got 3 places to hold it from. What do you think?
Yeah.
Todd half jokingly said that he thought it would sink to the bottom. But fortunately for me, as heavy as it was, it floated like a cork. Almost at the exact height that I needed it to be.
Pretty awesome. What are you building for a roundabout launch platform? We don't need one. Because they're stable.
Can't argue that fact. That Todd is a funny guy, but he's right. The roundabouts are very stable. I'll make another video about them at some point. For now, I was thinking about kayaks. Eventually, I'll put some big legs in here. Maybe a nut and bolt right there, and this thing will be pretty secure. Thank you, guys. Heck yeah. So now these get cut off flush. The 2x12 will go all the way over, so the carpet will go right to the edge. Slide the boat in. You get in it, there'll be a couple handles. Maybe a handle right here, like on top of the 2x12. So once you get in, you grab the handles, slide out. My explanation was cut short by the rainstorm that had been creeping up on us. At least I got it in the water. And after the rain stopped, it was time to add the 2x12, which was really going to tie everything together. But first I had to tie the 2x6 that I had put on previously to the existing dock. This was certainly going to make the kayak launch more stable. I don't think this thing's entirely stable. Drilling 1/2-inch holes and pounding in these big bolts. Once I had them tightened down, I couldn't picture this thing going anywhere. With that part of the job done, it was time to take a break, I guess, and have some lunch because I got rained on again. But actually, it was a good opportunity to work on the runners, as I call them, the 1x4s that the kayak would actually slide up onto. Here you can see I'm beveling the front edges of them to make it easy for the kayak to slide up and on. That's what it looked like on the finished product. Now, in order to put the 2x12 on, I had to cut these proud ends of the tops of the ribs. I left them long intentionally, so that I didn't have to be hyper precise when I bolted them to the existing dock. It was just a matter of the unsettling cutting with power tools on top of the water. I was going to be using the circle saw this time, and my adrenaline was going because this is probably pretty dangerous, even though I was using a ground fault interrupted outlet. Also, I couldn't cut them from the dock because I'd be more likely to cut myself leaning over and falling. Putting a pallet on the launch and standing on that proved to be a fairly safe way to get this job done. This certainly felt like one of the times I wanted to tell you guys, kids, don't try this at home. That might be the gnarliest part of this entire build. And with it done, I was able to fit the 2x12 in place. I was really anxious to see it all carpeted. I mean, a rug can really tie a room together, you know, dude? Wrapping presents for people. Look what Uncle Marty got you. A floating dock, just what you wanted. With this present all wrapped up and sitting in place, it was ready to be screwed down. I used a bunch of deck screws to hold it to the existing dock and to the new kayak launch. And then things started going really quickly. The runners went down, and I just had to try this thing out. Before I went any further, I had to make sure this thing was going to work. Being an 8-foot launch, I figured trying the 12-foot Catch 120 was a good idea. If it could handle this boat, it could pretty much handle anything. Smooth as silk. I was really excited to see the rest of this come together now. Now that I have a nice platform to work from, cutting this side will be a lot easier. And I'm going to use something that I very seldom use on the water, which is a level. See if I can mark this side for the cuts. I had left both sides of all of the ribs proud. The side I was marking now was going to be cut down and was going to get a handrail. And the Catch made actually a pretty good work platform. I don't suppose I'll be using a circular saw from a kayak too often. At least the sawdust was easy to clean off of it. Next to handrail, got some carpet. And everything started to take on a real finished look. A beveled end on another 1x4 added a nice little touch, and it added some more stability to that side of the launch. A stainless handle. A cleat. And another handle. Plus one more as a place to tie the kayak to. And there was only a little bit left to do. This little decorative piece that I cut out with a jigsaw was going to be a little bit more than just decoration. It was going to keep some of the debris from going in between the ribs and making a mess out of the kayak launch. That should keep out those nasty mangrove seeds that like to hang out in there all the time. Then there was the 4-inch PVC that you saw earlier. I capped it. I made little wooden frames for it. And then I attached one end to the kayak launch. This raised it up out of the water like about an inch or two. And then I attached the other end to the existing floating dock. And the reason I was doing all this is because the weight of the ramp was pushing down on the floating dock, making everything somewhat unlevel. This little bit of extra flotation made everything perfect. You know, having an easy way on and off the water means an awful lot to me since I'm opening a kayak rental place. Actually, anybody who wanted a really easy way to get in and out of a kayak and had a dock could benefit from building this. Launching and docking from this thing was a piece of cake. And of course, doing DIY videos and sharing ideas and cool stuff on the water with you guys always makes me feel really good. And you know, you guys help me do this every day. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And hopefully I'll get to see you here trying out the kayak launch someday in the future.